If you've started this lesson, you should have already gone through the Know Your Enemy lesson. Of course, in that, we learn more about anxiety and depression, how these are two areas that if we understand, start again, one, two, three. If you're on this lesson, you should have already completed the Know Your Enemy lesson. This is, of course, where we learn more about anxiety and depression. I love the analogy of the more you know your enemy, the more you can fight and defeat it. And so, of course, anxiety and depression are our enemy when we allow them to conquer us. Here's the beautiful thing, though, is when you overcome your anxiety and depression, when you learn to manage and control it, it is amazing how much power you have. Being able to look back and say, man, I went through some really tough times, felt pretty low, was pretty distracted, did a lot of avoidance. I was just not living my life. And then when you learn to manage it, it's like you have a new lease on life. So I want you to recognize, while we talk about it being our enemy, we can make our enemies our friends. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we move on into the next lessons. So this lesson is understanding being an introvert. Now, there's a lot of questions and a lot of debate about what an introvert is. And it's often not what we think. It's not shyness, and it's not fear, and it's not anxiety. There's kind of this misconception that all introverts, don't want to be around people, that they don't like people, and that they're all shy and cannot handle themselves in social situations. This is, in reality, not the case. So let's learn more about what an introvert is. An introvert is a personality preference. It is a trait. Now, a person can be on what we'd call the spectrum of being an introvert, just like they could be on the spectrum of being an extrovert. In other words, we all know that friend, right, who is totally outgoing, the life of the party. He'd be on the extreme end of the extrovert. Then you have the individual who, they definitely like social situations. Again, they're fueled by it, but they're not always in the limelight. Okay. Now understand that once an introvert, always an introvert. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between being an introvert and then having anxiety. This really is the key, and this is the key of this whole lesson. All of this training is to help us recognize that why we may be introverts, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have anxiety, and that it's our anxiety that can and often is holding us back and not being an introvert. And so when we overcome the anxiety, we're left with just being an introvert. And let's talk about what that means. Okay. So being an introvert means that we're energized by alone time. So we need to have our quiet time. We need to do activities such as reading and walking and going hikes by ourselves. Being able to stop and reflect. We process the world by ourselves. When we're with large crowds, this overwhelms us. This takes away our energy. Again, not that an introvert doesn't like being around other people and very well may enjoy, being around others and being in crowds. It just leaves them exhausted. So they enjoy the solitude. Prefers fewer friends. Now, again, I'm kind of putting a one size fits all on this. This is not necessarily a one size fits all personality type. However, I find that most introverts do prefer fewer friends. That they kind of have more of that small group that they feel close to, that they share more with, and they tend to keep that a little bit smaller. A quiet and more required effort by others to understand. So they tend to be a little more on the quiet end, and that in order for someone to get to know them, it takes some time for their trust to be built. But once you've made friends with an introvert, typically they are friends for life. And again, too much stimulation leaves you exhausted. So, being in large crowded areas, concerts, amusement parks, busy shopping centers, during Christmas time can be very overwhelming for an introvert. And this too can make a person, again, very individualized, but can make a person feel a little bit overwhelmed, ornery, easily frustrated, low tolerance, and so forth. Okay, so how does that differ from anxiety? Anxiety is this excessive worry, and of course we learned about this in the previous lesson, but it's irrational fears. There's often those physical symptoms. Anxiety, of course, can be panic attacks, and then one has self-doubt. So it's really this negative, overall gloomy kind of cloud that hangs over, being forced on us with worry. So again, I want you to look at those two again and recognize these are not the same thing. Being an introvert and being anxiety, or being an introvert and being shy. Being an introvert and having social anxiety is not the same thing. Now, social anxiety, when I talk about anxiety, usually people get confused when it comes to introverts. Mixed in with anxiety is this idea of them having social anxiety, where one is afraid to speak in crowds, meet new people, mingle in socials. And again, that's very different from an introvert. Now, an introvert may prefer people to approach them. They may, again, not be the life of the party and keep to themselves. And yes, they don't exactly feel energized and comfortable, but yet they can do it. If they need to present, if they need to talk, if they need to introduce themselves in a business meeting or network opportunity, they can do it. It's just not preferred. I love this quote by Stephen Hawking. Quiet people have the loudest minds. And so when I think about this, I think, introverts, they really do. They have a lot going on in their mind. And so they do need that time to stop and reflect, process what's going on in their heads, make sense of it, and then come back to the world they live in. Okay, so introverts are appealing. Now, depends who you ask and who you talk to, but I think generally, we can agree that introverts have been given a bad name. We picture the quiet loner, right, who stands in the corner and people are afraid to talk to because they just look uncomfortable. The truth is that if we can be authentic, transparent, allow people to see that we're imperfect, just basically be ourselves, this endears people to us. There's something very endearing about the shy person, okay? And again, a shy person can be an introvert that is open about this and in many ways feels comfortable with it. So when you're comfortable with who you are, people become comfortable with you. Now understand, there's this piece of gaining confidence in somebody. And let's be honest, if we're going to go to the doctor, we want them to have lots of confidence, right? To be able to tell us what they think, their professional opinion. If they don't have an answer, they're going to find it for us. But to show us this confidence in their knowledge and their ability. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're endeared or become close to them. Now, when we show vulnerability, when we are authentic with other individuals, people become close to us. People become endeared to us. So I have found that when introverts do this, they very much are liked by people greatly because when they are open about this, people feel comfortable knowing that they are comfortable with themselves. And nobody's perfect. We all struggle. And so when someone's open about what they may struggle with or just their difference, then that becomes their strength. So you'll never change. That's just the way we want it. Okay. Understand something, that when you are tested for your personality type, and so this is where I want you as well to think about maybe taking a Myers-Briggs test. You can get on the internet, you can search. I probably will have a link in some of the notes. But you can take the test to see what your personality types are. And it always identifies whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Here's what you need to understand, is no matter what you do, no matter how many classes you take, how many therapy sessions you go to, how much you change in life, your personality type is going to stay the same. In other words, if you took a personality test now and did this all this amazing transforming work for yourself and took it even 10 years from now, it'd be the same. So again, it's about building on what strengths we have and what personality we do have. So we can very much be an introvert, and people may not even know that we're an introvert. And again, not that it would be a bad thing if they did, but I like to call this being a covert introvert. So when we compare being an introvert to an extrovert, we need to understand that one is not better than the other. It's just different. There's great qualities in both personality types. And of course, what it really boils down to is if you've met one introvert, you've only met one introvert. It doesn't describe who we are. It just describes one personality characteristic that is very individual to us. I hope you learned a lot on this, and I want you to move on to the next lesson. Thank you.